She has taken her two loves, her love of language and her care for the world, and molded them together. From Waco, Texas, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and now from our own hometown, Jonesborough, Tennessee. Please welcome Barbara McBride Smith.
Well, hey, y'all. Welcome to my town. Isn't this the best place in the world? I feel so lucky. I get to live here. I like to call it Camelot with a drawl. In the summer when I was 5 years old, Mr. Walt Disney released a brand new feature-length animated movie to the silver screens across America. It was a horror flick for small children. Now, nobody told me this. I figured it out all by my 5-year-old self. Now, I knew that it was a horror movie because a few years back, when my two older sisters had been little kids, they had gone to see another Walt Disney horror movie. It was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. My Aunt Ruthie had taken them to the Melrose movie theater thinking they were going to have a good time. Well, in that movie, when that beautiful queen shape-shifted into a hideous hag who was peddling poison apples, my two sisters, Coy and Pat, were terrified. One of them wet her pants and the other one threw up. Right in the middle of the Melrose movie theater. And my Aunt Ruthie said she was never taking small children to a Walt Disney movie again. Well, this new movie that had come out in 1950 was called Cinderella. And I was pretty sure it was sort of a children's version of Godzilla. It was going to be this female monster, and she breathed fire, and she burned people up into cinders and ashes. It was going to be blood and guts and murder and mayhem at the Melrose on Saturday. And I wanted to go. Well, I asked my mama if I could go to the movie on Saturday. Now, my mama had not figured out that this was a horror movie. So she said I could go, but she said I was going to have somebody take me. She couldn't take me because she was working on Saturday, and my daddy only went to drive-in movies. My Aunt Ruthie sure wasn't going to take me. So my only choice were my two older sisters, Coy and Pat. Now, they were teenagers by now. I was 5 years old. Taking me any place was about the last thing on their priority list. But I begged and I whined, and they finally gave in. They said, all right, they would take me to the movie theater on Saturday afternoon, but they said there was a deal we were going to make. And the deal was that I had to do all of my chores for the entire week without being reminded, without whining about it, and I had to do all of their chores for the entire week too. Not only that, there was a second part. I had to use my allowance money to buy tickets for all three of us. Well, it was a rotten deal, but it was the best I could do. And so I worked hard all week around the house. I got my chores done. I got their chores done. And so Saturday came, and I had 75 cents. And I was ready. And now I had enough money to buy 3 tickets to the Melrose, and I was going to have enough left over that I could buy a box of candy at the concession stand. Now, my favorite candy was called pom-poms. There were a lot of kids who liked a candy called Milk Duds. I hated Milk Duds. Why in the world would you want to eat a candy called a dud? It's like eating something called a loser. But now, pom-poms, they were perfect candy. They came in this box, and they were little round balls of caramel. And they were dipped in milk chocolate. And I would put one in my mouth at a time, and I would suck on it until all the chocolate came off. And then I'd bite the caramel ball in half, and I'd stick each half on my closed eyelids and go, ah! don't know why. I was 5 years old. You don't have to explain anything that you do when you're 5 years old. Well, it was time to go to the movie. Well, it was Saturday morning at least, and I didn't want to be late, so I got up early. I finished up my last chores for the week, and I was waiting for my two older sisters, Coy and Pat, to come out of their bedroom. It's going to be a long wait. So I went ahead and got dressed. I put on my favorite outfit. I was wearing my army green shorts with all the pockets in them because, see, I was going to need one pocket for my money and the other pocket for my pom-poms. I also had on my red cowboy boots. Now, I didn't usually wear shoes in the summertime. I had feet like asbestos on the bottom because in the summertime in Texas, it got up to about 110 degrees in the shade. I could walk barefoot on concrete. So going barefoot was my status quo. Now, except on Sundays, I did wear shoes to church on Sundays because my mama said I had to. But that day, going to the Melrose movie theater, I was wearing my red cowboy boots. And that's because my mama said that the floor of the Melrose movie theater was encrusted with about 25 years worth of putrid, petrified candy and popcorn and soda pop. And she said that if I went in there barefoot, my little toes would get stuck down, bogged into that floor, and she would have to come up there with her butcher knife and cut my toes off. So I was wearing my red cowboy boots to the Melrose movie theater. Now, I did not have on a shirt. I was 5 years old. I didn't need a shirt. I didn't have anything to cover up. Now, my daddy had told me that if I would drink black coffee, I would grow hair on my chest. But so far, I hadn't seen any signs of it. So I was not wearing a shirt. It was going to be cooler that way. So I was sitting outside my two older sisters' bedroom waiting for them to come out so we could go to the Melrose. Well, finally, about noon, they stepped out of there. And they were dressed to the nines. They had on these sundresses that were real tight-fitting on the top. I guess they had something to cover up. And then their dresses kind of shot out like parachutes from the waist. They were wearing about 6 crinoline petticoats each. They had on high-heel shoes and nylon stockings in the heat of summer in Central Texas. They also had on lipstick and some of my mama's Avon perfume. Well, that meant just one thing. They were planning on meeting boys at the Melrose movie theater. I should have known they had ulterior motives. Well, they finally were ready to go, and so I headed for the front door. I said, "Come on, we don't want to be late." And they just stood there looking at me. I turned around, I said, "What?" And they said to me, "You need a shirt." Only that's not the way they said it. The way they said it was, "You need a shirt." Because you see, my two older sisters, Coylin and Pat, they were both deaf. And so we communicated mostly in sign language. Well, I looked at them and I said, no shirt. I explained to them that I was not going to be enslaved to society's standards for feminine beauty. I told them I didn't need a shirt. And they said to me, "No shirt, no movie." "Fine," I said, "fine, okay." And so I walked into my parents' bedroom, and I opened up the chest of drawers where my parents kept their clothes. Well, the one drawer where my daddy kept his clothes. And I dug around in that drawer, and I found one of my daddy's red bandanas. He called them his sweat rags because he wore them when he was outside working in the garden. Well, I took out one of those red bandanas, and I folded it into a triangle. And I took 2 corners of that triangle, and I put them under my armpits, and I tied it in the back, and then that other point was hanging right down over my navel. It was my first halter top. And it was perfect because it covered up whatever it was they thought I needed to cover, and it still gave me a little breeze down here by my belly button. So finally, we were ready to go to the Melrose movie theater. Well, we walked down the 4 blocks, James Avenue. We got down and we turned right on Spate, and we could see ahead the Melrose movie theater. Oh, boy, I could hardly wait. I started to run toward the theater, and as I got closer, I saw something that I had never seen at the Melrose before. There was a line of people, kids, grown-ups, teenagers. They were lined up from the box office all the way down to the corner, around the corner, down to the end of the next corner. My sisters, they said they'd never seen anything like that either, except one time on Halloween, there had been this twin bill horror flick with Dracula and Frankenstein, double feature, but they had never seen a line on a Saturday afternoon like this. Well, I was afraid we weren't going to get seats, so I started running as fast as I could. Well, as we got right up to the box office, I saw 2 boys standing there, teenage boys holding up tickets for all of us. They were my sister's boyfriends. And they had gotten there early and gotten all our tickets. And I thought, woo, this boyfriend idea is not so bad after all. If it's a free ticket to anything, I'm in favor of it. So I took my ticket and I went in the door of the Melrose. I quickly discovered that that free ticket was a bribe. It meant that I could sit anywhere I wanted to except close to my sisters and their boyfriends. But that didn't bother me because I knew where they were going to sit. They were going up to the passion pit in the balcony. That's where all the teenagers sat. I didn't want to be anywhere near that. So I took my ticket, I went in, I stopped at the concession stand, I got my pom-poms, opened them up, and I put them in my pocket. I didn't want to be rattling paper around during this horror movie. So I made my way down the center aisle, and I had my choice of seats. I was one of the first ones in the theater. I got a seat right on the front row next to the aisle. I sat down, settled in. I was ready. Bring it on. Murder and mayhem. Well, finally, the lights began to dim, and those old raggedy blue velvet curtains parted, and I heard the opening song to Walt Disney's Cinderella. A dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. What? What was this? How could a horror film start with a stupid song like that? I just sat there not believing what I was seeing in front of me. But, 5 minutes into that movie, I was hooked. I mean, what was there not to love? There was Gus and Jacques. You remember those 2 little mice? Cutest little things. And what an adorable clothing choice they had made. They wore shirts and shoes, but no pants. Oh, there was Bruno, that faithful dog, and there was that horrible, wicked cat, aren't they all? And of course, there was Cinderella. Cinderella, the little sister, the one who was abused and humiliated by her 2 wicked older sisters. She was made to do all of her chores and all of their chores. Suddenly I realized what this movie was about, and I stood up on the front row of the Melrose and I said, yes! Thank you, Mr. Disney. See, I identified. I was she and she was me. People around me started saying, shut up, sit down. So I sat back down, but I knew now I was going to love this movie. Well, as the movie progressed, I began to figure out why my sisters had crammed their bodies into those tight-fitting sundresses and destroyed their podiatric bone structure with those horrible high-heel shoes. It's because that's what it takes to get a man. And why would anybody want one? Those girls didn't get it, neither did Cinderella. Because, see, there was going to be this party up at the king's house, and he had this son he was going to try to marry off, and they were all getting dressed up to go to the party, and Cinderella didn't have a pretty new dress to wear, and she was whining and crying, carrying on about it. Well, suddenly, this little white-haired lady showed up, and she had this magic wand, and she was tapping things, and she was changing them. She changed a big pumpkin into a carriage that Cinderella could ride in. And then she changed this bunch of mice into horses to pull the carriage. And suddenly I felt this tapping on my shoulder, and I thought, it's my fairy godmother. She's right here in the Melrose movie theater. She's gonna make all my wishes come true. And so I turned around, and right there in the center aisle was not my fairy godmother. It was my two sisters, Coy and Pat. It seems as how their boyfriends had not been enchanted with this high adventure flick that we were watching, and they had left the Melrose movie theater and abandoned my sisters up there in the Passion Pit. Those two boys had gone off to the Dairy Queen to spend the afternoon in dissolute living. My two sisters had come down to ask me if I would interpret the Cinderella movie for them. Now, let me explain. My two sisters, Coyle and Pat, they were deaf, but they could read lips. They went to movies all the time, and they loved movies. If they could get close enough to see the lips of the actors, they knew everything that was happening. But you remember Cinderella, it was an animated movie. These were cartoon characters. Cartoon characters do not have anatomically correct lips. You watch a cartoon character talking, it looks like a puppet. It can be saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, or it can say, Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony. It all looks the same. Their lips look the same, and so they could not read the lips. Well, there they were, standing in the dark in the aisle of the Melrose, and I motioned for them to sit down, and then I just slid out of my seat, and I sat down right in front of them. We were sitting in the center aisle so that we could all three look up at the screen and watch the movie together, and I could sign to them, and they could read my signs and know what was happening. So that was how we sat there watching the rest of that movie. Well, as the movie went on, I saw that Cinderella did get to go up to the house where the king was having the party, and Prince Charming, well, he had all the personality of a box of hair. He danced one dance with Cinderella, and he fell in love with her shoes. That was the best my 5-year-old mind could figure it out. Because they were dancing, and her curfew came, which was midnight, and she had to take off running. She had to get out of there. Well, she was running fast, and you know, he started to follow her. He was chasing her. Now, come on. He could have caught her, right? Except his pants were too tight, but she ran out of one of her shoes. She was running, one shoe on, one shoe off. There's no reason he shouldn't have caught her, but he saw that shoe lying there. He couldn't pass it up. He picked up that shoe, held it close. Oh, it was beautiful. He had to have the other one, have a matching pair. So she kept going. She got out of there. Well, the next day, the prince, he went looking for her. They sent out servants. They were carrying that one shoe, trying to find the matching shoe. Well, they got up there to the wicked stepmama's house, and she brought out her two daughters, Anastasia and Drusilla, they were. And they both claimed that that shoe was theirs. They were lying. They had feet as big as 1949 Buicks. Now, if their mama had just gone back in the house and gotten a butcher knife and cut off their toes, They could have fit into the shoes, but no. Well, right away, servant realized that was not the right girls, and so he was starting to leave. Well, at that moment, Cinderella, she was up in a high room. You remember she'd been locked up there by the wicked stepmama? And the two little mice, Gus and Jacques, they managed to get up there with a key, and they got her out. And she came down, and she was holding the matching shoe. Well, she got to marry that prince. And I watched right at the end of the movie, and I was interpreting for my sisters, and it said, they lived happily ever after. We were just sitting there looking at that screen as the lights came up and those old blue curtains began to close. I signed the words to the last song in that movie. No matter how your heart is grieving, if you just keep on believing, the dream that you wish will come true. And we just sat there, my sisters and I. We couldn't move. People around us got up and they started climbing over us, trying to get up the center aisle, but we couldn't move. Our rear ends were glued to the floor of the Melrose. I thought, Lord love a duck, our mama's gonna come up here, the butcher knife, there's no telling what she's gonna cut off. But finally, my two big sisters, they were so smart and brave. They wrapped their arms around me, and then they grabbed the seats on either side of that center aisle, and they ripped all three of us up right out of the floor of the Melrose. I knew they'd saved my life that day. I would still be entombed in the Melrose if it weren't for them. Well, we walked up the center aisle. We were the last ones in the movie theater that day. We were laughing like the Three Stooges. As we passed through the concession stand area, I realized I still had 75 cents in my pocket. And so I asked my sisters to put me down. And I went over to the concession stand and I bought an extra large box of popcorn with butter all over it. And I shared it with my sisters as we walked home arm in arm. When we got home and our mama got in from work, she asked us if we liked the Cinderella movie at the Melrose that day, and we said, yeah, it's okay. But the truth is, I loved that movie. I have loved it ever since. I learned a lot of things that day and the days that followed. Number one, don't ever marry a guy with the personality of a box of hair. You will not live happily ever after. Number two, drinking black coffee will not make hair grow on your chest. And number three, your mean, wicked, horrible, ugly older sisters, they can change. Someday, they might be bridesmaids in your wedding. And they might be your best friends in the whole wide world. And when they're gone, you're gonna miss them something awful. I hope all of you live